Afternoon, all. Thanks for joining me on our Amicus Live Roundtable series. Obviously, I'm Sam Smith, one of the senior recruitment consultants here at Amicus. I'm joined by a fantastic group of individuals, and we're going to be talking about feature development, product development, so the struggles and successes of last year and how that can play a part in 2024. Obviously, a little bit about ourselves. Obviously, Amicus being a recruitment business, sort of we like to be, as the name says, Amicus, Latin for friend, a friend to the community, and give spaces for engineering managers and leaders alike to share thoughts and debate topics. Hence, why we're all here today. So, I'll start you off sort of by letting everyone introduce themselves. So, yeah, Yannis, please fire away.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Yannis. I am the head of engineering at Behavior Lab. I've been there for almost 3 years, about 2.5 years. We have a team of about 10 engineers and we're about 16 total. So early stage startup, lots of fun problems. Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. And Aurélien, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my name is Aurélien. Until last month, I was the tech lead at Viridios AI, and I've been with Viridios for 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years. We had 9 engineers in total as well, including the DevOps. So I was helping the backend, front end, and DevOps team reaching their goals. Yeah, and the same as Yannis, a lot of very fun problems that we encountered. Yeah, it was a great experience. I have almost 10 years of experience in software development. And yeah, that's it.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Cheers, Georgina.
Yeah, hi, I'm Georgina. I'm a software engineering manager. My focus has primarily been on scalability and building flexible systems. I've worked full stack across customer, product, and platform engineering teams, and I'm currently at Silvera, where I started by leading the app platform team, so enabling our products to move faster. And now I'm heading up the ratings tech team, so looking after the teams focused on our core product as well as internal tooling. And then for those of you that don't know, Silvera provides trusted carbon data for genuine climate action.
Fantastic, thank you. And Simon.
Hi, yeah, I'm Simon Wood. I'm Director of Software Engineering at Collinson. I guess Collinson's best known for Priority Pass, which is our global lounge access program. Been in travel tech a number of years and been at Collinson for about 1.5 years now. And yeah, my role there is responsible for the wider engineering community of practice across all areas.
Brilliant. So thanks for introducing everyone. And so in terms of this topic, obviously, aim is to just have a quick discussion around sort of the struggles that last year sort of encountered within tech teams from both an engineering perspective, but also a wider team. So looking at last year as a climate as a whole, what can sort of you all say that might have been different to obviously what you've all noticed throughout your careers in tech so far? Don't be shy. Anyone? Anyone got a first comment at all?
I guess one of the things that a lot of people are talking about now is the sort of impact on inflation and how that affects sort of tech businesses. There are a lot of global tech layoffs that, the news is still talking about today, where big tech scaled up and possibly scaled back down to pre-pandemic levels. I guess that was a significant change. Just, a lot of candidates on the market for those of us that are hiring, but there's a lot of people fighting over the same roles. It's very different maybe than tech was 5 or 10 years ago.
And how do you think that sort of affected, I suppose, the feature development and sort of things from a wider perspective? What sort of things do people see within their teams?
Yeah, I think because we've got to be much more focused at like where we're putting engineering resources and people on the ground. What I've seen is that we're developing more platform technologies. So particularly at Silvera, we're looking at developing platform which we can then quickly spin up new products from and then test product market fit from there without investing a huge amount of resources up front.
And more on the people side, the events of last year brought a lot of uncertainty on the market, from the failure of the banks in California later last year, through the failure of actually many startups, even some unicorns. We feel kind of an anxiety also from the software engineers, an anxiety of losing their jobs mostly. And yeah, I think it has been quite a difficult year for our market, and it definitely impacted also the mood of the people.
No, of course, I think you mentioned just then as well, obviously, a lot of layoffs within sort of startups, and even, as you said, sort of unicorns, sort of not reaching the successes that they may have planned. I think that obviously followed quite a few trends within sort of the industry as a whole. Sort of, I think we'll touch upon that very shortly. But for those of you that are part of startup life at the moment, how are you sort of dealing with the effects of last year already? How have you sort of kept it going?
I think you definitely notice it, but we notice it in some sort of the typical expected ways and some ways that are, I guess, less expected. We've seen a significant increase in the number of applications we have to the roles we post, which might surprise some, and it's put a lot of pressure on our recruitment processes. I think, especially as a small company, when you have this challenge where you have to really choose what you concentrate on, when you then also have to invest a huge amount of time in recruiting, and with the rise of chatbots that become progressively more difficult to distinguish from real people completing coding assignments, that changes the way you recruit and how much time you have to spend on that process. And for us, that's been a big challenge because we want to prioritize our customers, and we do. We want to prioritize new features and platform infrastructure, and we do. But then we also want to be fair to the candidates. And I think that part for us has been quite a big challenge with, time on recruiting spent going up significantly.
That's really interesting, Yannis. Are you seeing people that you believe, I guess, are trying to game the recruitment process using AI then?
We've seen it quite a bit, actually. In fact, we had to do something that I don't really believe in, where we had to change the way we assessed the candidates. So originally, we put a lot of emphasis on asking the types of questions that really relate directly to the type of work that people would do in the role they would have on the job. We kind of steered away from the traditional algorithms and data structures questions that you'd often find at big companies. Unfortunately, although we tried to do that because we thought it was more fair to candidates, we've had to switch that mindset a bit more recently and resort to using platforms like HackerRank, where you can actually look at what the candidate is doing while they complete the assessment. And you'd be surprised. I think I can tell you that 50% of the candidates that complete these assessments just copy paste things directly into the editor. They think you can't see it, even though we tell them we can. They do it anyway, and half the time it's wrong or it doesn't make sense. And I think it's kind of disappointing, to be completely honest.
Wow. I think we also slightly changed our recruitment process, like partly because like thinking from a diversity angle, but also partly like to stop this copy and pasting where like for our programming part of the interview, we asked like them to do a small part take home. And then we'd like go through their code in person and ask them to add on to it. And you can tell when someone's not so familiar with their code.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, on my side, I always prefer to do a live coding session with the candidates at some points. So for that, I was using a tool called CoderPad. I don't know if you are familiar with that. And that's very interesting because you can see in live what they are doing, and just a very simple algorithm exercise, and you see if, from my point of view at least, you see if they, if they used AI tool or something during their coding test before. I feel it's also a good introduction between you and the candidates. You see how he works, how he thinks, and even if it takes time, I agree. I think that's actually the best way to assess a candidate.
So obviously within that then obviously looking back at the sort of the market as a whole, then sort of that rise in the layoffs and sort of rise of these new trends and AI tools coming out, then we're seeing a lot of or less feature development in that startup world then because of time taken away from leading teams and building things into sort of hiring for the teams. Is that what sort of you're saying was a big thing that you noticed obviously last year, Yannis?
Yeah, I think we've had to spend a significant amount of time because of great things. We want to grow the team and we have the resources to grow the team, and that's good. But I think that has taken definitely time away from developing new features and concentrating on sort of longer term platform maintenance. And I want to make sure that we involve different stakeholders, different people across the hiring process. We do live coding interviews as well. We don't just do take-home assessments. But I want to make sure that, they get an opportunity to meet the team, because for the candidates, it's super important that it's a good fit for them, but it also needs to be a good fit for us. And I think we should have different engineers in the team that get to be a part of that process. And that's a huge time effort and time investment that we put into the candidates. And I think the upfront applications are what have really skyrocketed. It's just more to initially sort through before you decide who you then want to interview. And that takes more time probably than it should.
Do you think this is like a trend because of the increase in AI, or just because your company's scaling? Like, I've always found interviewing takes a lot of time outside of IC work. And like, as you start to rapidly scale a company, it's going to take way more time.
I don't know if it's AI. I think maybe AI has lowered the barrier for people to think that they can apply and they can try to do these assessments, whereas before it would have been too difficult to try to submit something under the time constraints that they would have. I'm not sure if you can attribute it to AI directly. I don't think we've grown enough to justify the increase in applications yet that we've seen. I think it's been something like 3 times more applications, but the team only has a handful more people. So not really sure.
Yeah, could just be then the wider sort of tech layoffs that obviously a lot of people have sort of seen. But obviously we touched on a really important point, I think, is that rise of AI. We all know it's coming into sort of tech teams. A lot more tech companies are becoming AI companies, as per se. So that's one of the trends that sort of I want to discuss, is how did that sort of play a part last year in feature and product development?
I think it distracted a lot. There was a quote I used to use back at my previous company, because we actually used AI as part of our core workflow. And it's from Forbes, and it's like 40% of European AI startups don't actually use AI as part of their business. I think like a lot of it is this buzzword, like how can we attract either more consumers or more investment, without actually thinking like, how does this benefit our core product? And is this something that we actually need to build, or can we buy? Because it's very resource intensive. Yeah, I think it was a distraction for a lot of people. I think some people have done it very well, and fair play to them.
Yeah, I guess I see it as another tool in the box. So it's kind of, we're trying to do value generation. What we're doing is to create value, either monetary value for the business or product value in the end consumer. And AI is one way of getting there, just like writing code or using the cloud is another way of getting there. It's not the end's destination, but it's often pitched, as you say, we're an AI company. Like AI is the thing, when AI isn't the destination. It's a tool to get there.
Yeah, but I think the value that you get out of a product with AI will depend less and less on the quality of that AI as the solutions that you can buy become better and better. It becomes less and less about building a better AI to deliver more value to the customers. Then it becomes about wrapping that in the correct UI and the correct user experience, because that's what will really differentiate a lot of the products. That's where we're different. Most engineering will have simple CRUD operations, some analytics functions, some platform infrastructure. At the end of the day, what makes us different is the domain that we operate in, the problems that we're trying to solve for our customers, and how we wrap that all up in an interface and in an experience that should make users' lives better. At some point, that value add and that sort of value generation doesn't come anymore from the quality of the AI, but actually how you wrap it all up. And I think probably last year, more time has been invested in one than the other.
And from my point of view, the only problem with AI is that everyone is trying to be using AI. Everyone is trying to be trendy, and many times some businesses are implementing AI just to implement AI, even though the feature which is actually using this AI is actually kind of sometimes a bit useless for the end user. It's just for some businesses, some some people, some product people wants to be trendy and just are trying to imagine any kind of feature that could use an AI just to be using an AI, even though there is no real value behind.
I think
Oh, sorry, go on.
I think it really comes back to Simon's point. Like, if AI isn't part of your core product, then how can you use it as a tool? Like for us, so we do use AI in a number of areas, but like one thing in particular is like when you're evaluating a carbon offset project, there's a huge amount of documents to go through. Like, how can we leverage AI to speed up that process? And like that is something that AIs can be super beneficial for, and like can really help us there. It's not going to be part of our core products, so we won't market ourselves necessarily as an AI company. But like it's a great tool in our toolbox.
That's really interesting, because I share that view, and something I found myself talking a lot about in my business last week was less how we use AI in what we call product and innovation, the engineering and the product teams, and like, why aren't we looking at it more for operations, for sales, for finance, for like, they're the ones that, it's now the personal computer replaces the typewriter kind of thing. So how can we, 5x everybody in every other department? And possibly we're too busy looking at end users, we're not looking at internal users. So I wonder if, talk about trends, I wonder if a trend, certainly in the businesses that I work in, is going to be looking at internal users in the same light that we look at external users, and how can we use the tools in our arsenal to make the business efficient whilst also generating additional revenue. And it's the two hand in hand.
Of course, and I think, Georgina, you touched upon it in terms of sort of one of the things with AI was distraction, and it sort of pulled teams away from maybe what they were I don't want to say supposed to be doing, but sort of the engineering that we sort of need to be looking at, whether that be that sort of tech debt sort of piece, or whether that be, again, developing a new feature that will give that value add, rather than sort of looking at the trend. Did anyone see any sort of did anyone see anything in terms of internally how to balance sort of the use of teams within that? Sort of, was anyone looking at changing the way that the team was ran, or changing the way that sort of features and development was used with all these distractions going on from AI last year?
I think this has been the age-old problem in engineering, that there's always this balance between building new features and maintaining what's there. I think the number of engineers you need to build something in the first place is radically different than the number you need to maintain a system and grow a system over time. And I think sometimes that isn't understood as well by everybody in the product conversation. And I don't think AI has been unique in that context. It's just been another variable that brings up that same discussion that we always go back to. Do we focus on maintenance, or do we focus on what's new? I recently read this book, which I've been recommending to everybody. I'll rip it out again, called Tidy First by Kent Beck. And he compares the whole problem to DCF, so discounted cash flow, and options Greeks. It's this constant trade-off where you basically measure value very differently based on short-term and long-term priorities and what you're trying to get out of it. And I think it's a really, really good parable, I guess, to describe the problem, because I think we talk about tech debt as this problem that looms over us and is going to destroy our lives as engineers and engineering teams, but it can also be a very powerful resource, especially as a startup. If you as a startup refuse to take on any technical debt, you might not be around long enough to ever speak to the customer that you took on that you didn't take on that debt for. At some point, you have to put ego aside, and if you treat it as a resource and you decide, now I'm going to take on some debt and now I'm going to pay it off, you end up, I think, in a healthier position overall, but I don't think the extremist view works in either direction.
Did last year have any effect on that, in terms of, did anyone see anything specifically sort of where that might have changed, or any examples of sort of where sort of the tech debt was needed to be paid off, or could have been taken on more within sort of last year?
I guess one area I saw in our business was around having different rules for different teams depending on what they're doing. So like others said earlier about having a core and being able to build features on it, there was sort of a appetite to go slower, to go faster on some of our core technology. We call it a travel ecosystem, and around making that mature and doing that properly, whilst a feature that we're testing in market that we don't know whether it's going to work or not, actually we can go faster and build up tech debt there because it may end up in the bin. And if it doesn't and it gets traction, well, then we can loop back around and have a concerted effort to to clean it up and tighten it up. So it was I guess a big trend for me and a big change on maybe earlier parts of my career is instead of having a sort of rule book to engineering and applying it to all teams, is having guiding principles, but having different flex of different rules with different teams, depending on whether they're working at the bleeding edge and experimenting on growth, or whether they're actually part of my platform team and doing more solid engineering that needs a more concerted, careful effort. So different rules for different teams, depending on where their focus is.
Yeah, I also think like it depends on the kind of stage of either the startup or, I guess in your case, Simon, the stage of the product. Like I think up to kind of Series B, you're kind of needing to be a bit scrappy and develop things quickly and not necessarily pay down tech debt as much as you perhaps want to. It's more about like, how do we get the next customer and the next round of funding? And then once you get to a certain level, or in your case, Simon, like a certain level of product market fit, okay, should we take a step back and reevaluate where we are? How are we going to make sure this thing is then going to scale well and be like the right flexible solution for what we need?
On my side, we what we did is that we improved our engineering practices, meaning that every software have a technical debt. This is unavoidable. However, by improving the development phase of a software, there is less chance that the technical debt becomes a problem over time. It works mostly when you have a smaller team, like less than 15 people, less than 20 engineers, to give them time to do code reviews, to do testing, to write a lot of tests, even though many of these tests won't be necessary. And we figured out that doing so, you will spend more time in development, doing the development itself, but it's definitely less than fixing it in the future. And I've done that over the last 5 years. And to be honest, it really fixes a lot of problems before they happen. But yeah, the only issue is to convince the product people that development for a certain feature will take more time than what they expect. That's the only thing. But once this is done, definitely there is. It's not a game changer, but it's definitely an improvement.
I think it's hard to quantify how much it costs to go back and fix it later. I think that's what's hard, right? To the product people.
That's hard, but I've done this test in my previous position where we were developing very small softwares. So it was really small pieces of software. So we were doing RPA at that time, robotic process automation. So it was really small pieces of software that we were delivering to some teams of the bank I was working for. And so here it's easier to quantify, actually. It's easier to quantify, especially when you have some of the softwares which actually are quite similar with each other. And here we figured out that the first softwares that we developed in this team, we were spending much more time, even though they were less complex, we were spending much more time maintaining it than the new ones, the new softwares that we actually developed almost the same way, but we spend more times in doing code reviews, in doing improvements, in doing automated testing around these pieces of softwares. And we definitely saw a difference. And here it was actually easier to quantify because we were having a team of 1, 2, 3 developers for a group of softwares. And so here it was easy to quantify because they were actually counting the time that they were spending maintaining each of these small softwares.
When we're in larger teams, and how does that sort of play a part? Sort of how, or whose job is it to make sure then that we're either paying down the tech debt or driving forward development? So where does that come into play, and who sort of leads that discussion, I suppose? Is it engineering leaders? Is it engineering managers? Or is it sort of the job of higher up within the team? Or where's it coming from?
It's like the benefit of having that push and pull with a product manager. Of course, product managers want like the features to be developed as quickly as possible. And then it's our job as engineering leaders, as engineers, to like highlight any limitations and things around that. And highlight, you know, we need to spend enough time on testing or implementing logging and monitoring and alerting of these features. And it's this like push and pull between the two, which makes you understand like, you know, which corners are like the healthy corners to be cut and what are our non-negotiables.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you seeing engineering being pulled more left then, as in sooner into the process? So I've worked in various businesses where engineers and products have a voice very early on and see things. And I've worked in other businesses where products forge ahead, include an engineer later for an engineer to go, well, that's not even possible. So you've wasted 2 weeks planning out a feature that's not possible because of the way our technology is. I guess we talk lots historically about sort of shift left on things like security and testing. Certainly I'm seeing more shift left, or trying to encourage more shift left on product teams that don't involve engineering early enough to go, well, actually it's an engineering and a product conversation as to what the art of possible is.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's always an issue, like how early on should you involve engineers? My opinion is as early as possible. Like as soon as we start thinking about this, let's put an engineer in the room, like see how they're thinking. Or I think the other side of it is like making sure engineers are like in customer conversations. Like, does that engineer like truly understand our users and therefore like understand why they're building something and therefore can like build it in a better way? Yeah, and it goes the same with like internal tooling as well. Chatting to the people using products or like might need to use a product, and then like we can start thinking together like what's actually needed here, how what's possible, what's not possible.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen pushback on when I love involving engineers earlier is then they're not writing code, where there's this sort of perception by non-technical people that every hour spent in a meeting on writing code is downtime. But then I find my role is then to articulate, I guess back to that, what I said earlier about going slow to go fast. If we include them earlier, that's saving lines of code that will be written and end up in the bin. So actually it's time well spent.
Yeah, I agree. It's time well spent. I think you're going to end up with a better solution and one that's more appropriate for the end user and for like our actual limitations. I don't think an engineer's job is just to write code.
100% agree.
100% agree as well. And we've also seen a big like push to shift left and involve engineers earlier. But I think what's made it more interesting for us is I think we saw that it really depends how much value you get out of that really depends on which engineers you put early on in the process. Sometimes platform engineering type engineers actually seemed less engaged and less productive overall when they were involved in those discussions early on. But we had other engineers that we involved across the stack earlier on in the discussions and in the process that actually contributed a huge amount of value. But for some, we actually saw the opposite. So I think you kind of need to make sure that whoever you're pulling in early, you need to pull someone in early, but I don't think the outcome is necessarily the same depending who you pull in.
You think it's like depending on so who the end users are really for each of those engineers. So for a platform team, the end users are much more internal rather than like a product engineering team where they're more focused on your customers.
Yeah, I think that's been the case for us. And take, for example, a front-end engineer. A front-end engineer probably spends more time looking at the UI than a designer or a customer ever will. To actually implement those features, they spend a ton of time looking at that screen. And there are certainly going to be ideas about how the product could work or how it could be potentially structured differently or another problem it might be able to solve that they have. And then they can bring a really unique insight to the table. And the same thing applies to engineers at other points in the stack. But platform engineering teams where the users, as you say, are in the first instance internal, I don't know if it helps them as much to be involved with the end customer discussions, at least not as frequently, because then they get demotivated, because to an extent, a lot of engineers get demotivated when they don't get that opportunity to sit down and write code. There's definitely value in the other parts of their role, for sure. But it's important, I think, also with all the layoffs and the uncertainty that people feel happy and they feel heard they feel respected in how they want to contribute to the company and the team.
Yeah,
It's
sorry. I think like I agree with the last point, but what I would say is I think it's important for engineers to have that like holistic view of the overall system and where their bit fits in. So maybe not having platform engineers always in those product meetings, but just having like that overall view somehow, even if it's in like an all hands type meeting.
Completely agree.
From my point of view, it's a question of personality. Some engineers like having this relationship with the product, be able to talk and to discuss of what they're going to develop. Some other engineers are just prefer to stay in front of their code and doing coding. This is really a question of personality, and for that we need to understand and to know our engineers one by one, to discuss with them, to see what they want to do. Some just want to stay in front of their screen and do coding. That's their right, I would say. But some other engineers, and a lot of them, want to participate to this project meeting. And I agree and disagree with you, Yannis, on the platform engineers who prefer to stay coding. I've seen a lot of them who wants to participate actually to this project meeting, and some front-end engineers who just want to have the ticket in front of them, the design of the designer, and do development. But it's really a question of personality, I think. One thing which is great in bringing the engineers really at the early stage of a product or feature development is that they develop it a way where it's prepared to tackle future needs if needed. So they are aware of what the final product should look like, should do. And they are prepared when they are developing the feature. They are preparing their code to be able to tackle future needs. And so definitely less time spent on adding features or adding whatever to the product later on.
How as leaders can we go about identifying those individuals then that get as Yannis said, get that value add earlier, and those engineers that obviously, Aurélien, as you said, sort of might want to do less of the, I suppose, face time, more sort of the development side. Where does that come in? Does that come in at the hiring stage, or does that come in when we're sort of working with these engineers? At what point as leaders do we identify that?
I think it's a bit of a combination of hiring and also like when we're working with them. I think, again, maybe depending on like the stage of the team or the company, like what are your actual requirements? I think we're trying to be really mindful of our hiring. So we're trying to reduce it, in which case like we're looking for like more specific profiles. And because we don't have unlimited resources, we want people who have like more of a product mindset, or, if they're working on our API, like more of a mindset on how to relate that to a public API and thinking about how customers are interacting with something. So there's like an element of these are the skills that we need within the team, but then there's also an element of like, how does this one person want to work? How do they want to progress? And how can we be mindful of the two?
Of course, no. So I think, as you said, especially when things are ramping up and in sort of more hires, and you're going to have a little bit more flexibility with bringing in those engineers that sort of can stay away or go into different parts of the position. I suppose then for ourselves, looking sort of back at sort of last year, sort of one thing that I know we spoke about prior to obviously jumping on the call was sort of looking at involving engineers to avoid misunderstandings, and with then obviously being able to build the products on top of the core product. I think, Simon, as you mentioned, that might then need to be scrapped. How do you go about sort of maintaining that, I suppose, positive element, even if a whole feature you've spent weeks on or however long that feature take would then need to be gotten rid of? How do we go about combating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to understanding about expectations on different teams. So if we have got teams forging ahead, experimenting, doing growth hacking type experiments, then we're quite clear that some of that stuff may not see the light of day. You know, we don't know whether it's got product market fit versus I guess, thinking about those teams that are on more stable elements like security, scale, cloud, etc. And again, if you set the expectations clear, then I think you play to different strengths. And we talked earlier in an earlier discussion about, I guess, not all engineers are the same. There's engineers comes in all shapes and sizes, and you know, even hiring for very specific needs, as you talked about, as you're looking for people, it's not just a skills list. It's actually, I need more product orientated engineers or specific skills and experience. Then it's aligning those different problems. I mean, I'm quite a fan of moving engineers around and try and almost put them a little bit out of their depth. So possibly move them to a team that they don't know they'll perform well in, but I think they'll perform well in, and then use that to test whether they can grow in ways that they don't really realize they can. But yeah, I mean, it's about, you know, I guess I don't really want to use an analogy. When you think about a chessboard, you've got different pieces that have different functions, you know, and they all play a part in the wider picture of the game. Maybe, you know, different engineers need to work on different problems depending on their strengths and where they bring expertise.
I'm curious to know, Simon, like, how would you cope when you don't necessarily have, like, can set those expectations up front? Like, really, software, we're meant to be able to fail fast in order to, like, you know, keep growing and building the best things. So sometimes you can't predict that something's not going to work. How do you help, I guess, how do you help your teams in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, another great question. I guess one thing I'm seeing a lot at the moment is sort of changing your question a little bit, but I'm working with teams that are having to manage with ambiguity. So they're having to operate without everything known. They would like everything known up front and stated, but not everything is known. Maybe 50% of things are known, what technology we're going to use, what a customer base might be. And it's making them comfortable with that ambiguity. So it's kind of covering, like, well, there's some standard knowns that we know, you know, are regardless. You know, we have to build performance systems, we have to build secure systems, they're a given. So maybe we focus on those things up front while we're discovering more details. Or if we don't know, you know, if we don't know whether this is going to see 100 users or 1,000 users, or whether it needs to be on mobile or web yet, you know, what can we do without knowing that decision, and how long can we progress without knowing that decision? At what point do we need to know it by? And then who do we need to have the conversations with to thrash that out? Or do we forge ahead and choose a path and get something out to market, and then use that to inform the decision of, like, okay, we launched this feature on web because it was quicker. Okay, we're going to stick that web page in the mobile app. Okay, that's not working. Right, let's go build it in the native mobile app now. But at least we learned from it. So I guess I'm seeing a lot more appetite in the business from stakeholders, from product and from engineers, to get features to the light of day quicker, so that we get fast feedback loops, and then use that to inform a later stage. But yeah, operating with ambiguity is something that I guess we're having to help engineers understand how to do more.
And you mentioned, obviously, creating that ecosystem earlier, sort of letting, I suppose, things will fail, and making sure that the whole offering within the feature doesn't, or that feature doesn't affect the whole offering, I think is what I was trying to get out there. How do we go? Obviously, you were talking about their ambiguity in terms of developing something that might not work out. How do we make sure then, as engineers, that doesn't affect the wider business if something doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. When I talked about ecosystem earlier, what we're trying to do at Collinson with our teams, and I've done it before in other travel technology businesses on Holiday Extras, is there's bits that will not change over the next 5 or 10 years. We know there's bits that won't change. When I was at Holiday Extras, you know, there's an e-commerce platform, people buy airport car parking. You know, I need to take payment, I need to put something in a reservation platform, I need to inform a supplier that someone's turning up with their car on a certain day. That stuff remains the same. Whereas there's bits that are fluid and can change, like how we present the product, whether we ask someone when they're traveling up front, whether we ask them their pricing up front. So the presentation of it can change. And what we're trying to do at Collinson with that ecosystem is design APIs, design the heart of the product so that it's flexible and not wedded to a single presentation style or a single offering of the product, so that as we find adjacent markets to expand into, or as customer behavior changes over time, or again, another one I'm learning a lot about at the moment is with a global company, people buy things very differently in different countries. So the China market or the Asia Pac market might behave very differently with lounge access and buying travel products to maybe an America's market or a European market. I don't want to back us into a corner. So I want to try and build a core that is flexible and adaptable, so that people can then innovate and build products around it. And I guess you asked me about setting expectations. I think for me, it's about us being really clear with the wider business about what parts are our crown jewels, are the heart that we're building, and we need more information from them. We need involvement, and we're betting on for the future, versus experiments where they can get excited about them, but we need to remind them, like, you know, I mean, we're a B2B business. Don't go and start selling all these things to every client that's out there, because we're in a test phase, and we'll give you a point where it's a go, no go decision. And then we formally agree that we're going to, you know, harden up that technology and push it to market.
Yeah, it's like building these flexible platform orchestration tooling that you can use for your solid like products where you know you have product market fit, but you can also develop quickly like new products on top of it. Like we're a very pure data product, so we're building accordingly. So we're trying to create a GraphQL API that's super flexible, that will allow like our app teams to like quickly develop these new products, test out that product market fit, and if it doesn't work, like it was just a shorter development time and we can move on to the next thing. But we have this core, like our core gem, I think is what you called it, Simon, that we don't need to bin, like it's there and it will still be there to allow for this faster development.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier as well about APIs. You mentioned API teams and encouraging them to look at public APIs. Something I've done a lot of earlier in my career as well, as go, don't ask the UI team what they want from the API. Otherwise, you'll build the API to their needs. You know, if you've got a add new customer or update customer's address API, design it as you think it needs to be used, agnostic of the API or UI or the UI, sorry, that will use that API. Again, it's just, I don't know, encouraging engineers not to back themselves into corners, you know, that will trip them up further down the line.
I think one of the ways you can see that, at least in the context of our organization, is that we've shifted to putting a lot more attention and emphasis on designing each of the individual services as if they would be publicly accessible. Not yet design it as if it's a public API. Do it so that it makes sense to everybody, because it might make sense now to couple it this way, for example, on that UI API boundary, but don't assume that the UI is going to use it or present it in this way. Represent the data, represent the truest thing that you're trying to capture, and build that interface around that. And then it's up to the other service to use that API as if it was public, even though you know you have that benefit of having that communication channel to take shortcuts and to build systems so that they integrate conveniently. But for the long-term ambition, designing the contracts and the boundaries between systems around the data and the entities that they represent is so important. And I mean, the pros do it best. Look at Stripe and all of the other public APIs that are designed so well. Take a page from that book.
100% agree. Yeah. Sorry, Sam.
No, I was about to say, it's really interesting what you said about encouraging teams to consider it like a public API. Again, that's sort of hits a chord with me, where I can even, you know, recite engineering conversations from this week where engineers are like, you know, team A is blocked by team B because I'm waiting to understand what their API is and how it's published. You know, why do you need access to the engineers? If you were calling Stripe or calling, you know, another API out there, Google Maps, whatever, you don't have access to their engineers. You've got documentation and that's it, and you're left to fend for yourself. So, you know, I guess encouraging teams to work that way will reduce dependency. That means we can go faster. That means we get time to market value quicker. So, yeah,
and engineers are creatures of habit, right? So they have external APIs that they love to use because they're just designed well. So why don't you apply the same consideration and the same thought to the APIs that you build yourself internally? Even if they're only going to be consumed by an internal service, surely the same logic, the same ideas, the same care should apply as well. Yeah.
And what the data is needed for one feature, if we build the API in a generic way, it can be reused by every other features. And so when you develop this new feature, you don't have to develop a new API endpoints, a new set of endpoints. It's already there. It's generic. It's working well. It has been tested through many other features in your product before. So you know it's working well. It's optimized, everything. So yeah, I totally agree with you guys.
Brilliant. I think we spoke a lot on obviously last year and what we've been doing over the sort of recent history, at least within engineering teams. I know we're not suppose, seers and can't predict the future. But what do we think this year will come with? Sort of, is there any trend that we're already seeing within the market, I suppose, on sort of development practices, or anything that's coming up that people are utilizing a little bit more, whether that be AI, whether that be a different piece or a different use of engineering? Is there anything else that anyone can see coming to the front a lot more in this year?
I think teams are more distributed and kind of more together than they've ever been. First COVID, and then sort of a very difficult year for tech last year. You have hybrid teams, you have teams that are always in the office, and you have something that's kind of in between, which I think is becoming more common. And I think with that, we're seeing the way that we work change a lot. In particular, our development practices have changed a lot. We're starting to put a lot more emphasis on async meetings and async work. Tools like Loom, we've been experimenting with a lot internally and trying to see if we can cut out that synchronous meeting where everybody needs to be online at the same time, talking to each other face to face, even doing big PR reviews on a Loom video where the author of the pull request is actually talking through the changes in this big sort of piece of work that they've done and sharing that with the team so that people can leave feedback asynchronously. Managing that boundary has been sort of a big shift for us, and it's something we're actively working on a lot now. I don't think change. Yeah,
that's interesting. I love asynchronous ways of working, and again, I've seen it in previous companies I've worked in, and it's a very efficient way of, like, meetings are the killer of productivity, and therefore we can kill the meetings. I guess the other one I'm quite passionate about and seeing more of is the idea of people writing down their ideas before they verbalize them. So, similar to the asynchronous working, like if 2 or 3 of us work on a Google Doc or a Word doc in the cloud and sort of adjust it and add to it over time, and then it's a 5 or 10 minute meeting at the end after everyone's read it to go, yeah, that's a bank's decision, or we agree with that way forward, rather than maybe a historical approach 2-3 years ago where we'd spend an hour in meetings, we'd go away, we'd come back a week later and spend another hour in meetings, still debating the same point. It's like, let's form the arguments on the document and then come back to it later. One thing I'm learning a lot about that is the art form of writing things down sometimes helps the thought process, because you have to write something in a way that's articulate to others, and therefore it forces you to do more deeper thought than maybe an off-the-cuff remark in a meeting.
I mean, sorry, go on.
No, it's even more challenge when you have your team of engineers splitted everywhere around the world. When I was working at Vivi just before, so we had a few engineers in India, some others in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in South America, in the US, etc., in Canada. And we had no other choices than working asynchronously. There is just no other way of doing it. But it's actually working really well. It's a challenge, definitely, especially when the engineers don't know each other, they never meet, and they will certainly never meet in person. So it's definitely a challenge, but when you find the right tools, the right combinations, the right how to say, the right framework for your team, it's actually working pretty well, and they can work pretty efficiently. Yeah, but it's definitely a challenge, and it will become more and more real next year and during the next few years, since every companies can hire people from everyone around the world. Working remotely has become a standard after COVID. And yeah, this kind of engineering teams splitted everywhere around the world will become something normal next year and 2025 even more, etc.
How do you balance, like, being fully asynchronous with creating that culture within your team? Because I feel like there's a balance here, right? Like, as much as possible, let's be asynchronous, but put in meetings when we need to chat, and just making sure that don't put a meeting in my calendar, basically, unless we have clear outcomes of what we want to get from that meeting.
I actually have a really interesting thought on exactly that point, something that we've started doing recently that I'm going to basically scream from the rooftops about. When you want to have that synchronous meeting, because inevitably you will need it and you can't just be async, set out before you join that call how much time you're willing to spend discussing this. Because in our team, we love to talk about how and we love to talk about why, and the engineers can get in hour-long philosophical discussions about the best way to solve a problem. But if we say, look, if we don't come to a conclusion within 30 minutes, we're going to move on, we set that expectation before we ever get on the synchronous call, that helps manage the impact of those meetings and sort of them ending up taking the entire day and distracting from other work.
Yeah.
And forget
reading, I think it was Dysfunctional Teams, 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And yeah, making sure like you have to time box things. Everyone can fill an hour if they want to. But if by half an hour you haven't finished the discussion, okay, well, you kind of know what are the next steps here and then acting on that. I do think meetings are beneficial in creating that culture, particularly when thinking about psychological safety, and also like building learnings within the team. I think like we've got to take juniors into consideration here, where like I think async meetings are fine for the async communication is fine when you've got just seniors, but when you're thinking about like how you're actually training a junior up on the team, the best thing is to jump on a call with that person, really walk them through things.
Absolutely, but if you are jumping on that call, then you can still record it with tools like Loom and stuff like that and capture the conversation, because that becomes a lesson that the junior engineer can watch over and over again and review whenever they feel like it. Had a long discussion recorded on a PR with a change to how one of our internal systems would work. And other engineers would have an opportunity to watch that at the speed that they want, pause it when they need time to go away and figure out what on earth they're talking about. And I think if you record those conversations, that helps as well. Fully agree that you need them, but recording them helps for learning as well.
Yeah. Big fan of watching meetings in 1.5 times speed.
So obviously that was we mentioned Loom a couple of times. Obviously that's an external tool. I know one thing that people have been looking at is, do we need to build in-house as well? Do we need this ourselves, or can we bring an external tool or an externally built product or whatever it is into a team? How can that potentially come about this year? Obviously I know we've touched on AI quite a bit, but is that something that we're maybe seeing more of in terms of more external tools giving back to the engineering teams more? Or
I think there's definitely thoughts on this, particularly as we're like trying to be more considerate about hiring. I think that's like across a number of companies, like how can we spend that resource to sometimes these tools are less than a quarter of an engineering resource in terms of cost, but the productivity that they could potentially bring is much, much more because it's spread across engineers. I think what you've got to bear in mind with these third-party tools is that they fit a very specific use case, and that's not going to be your use case. So how can you build on top of them to make sure it fits with yourself? And be really careful on doing proof of concepts, like covering a really wide range of topics to make sure that this tool will fit. And then on top of that, making sure you fail fast if it's not working.
I think that's been something we brought up quite a few points, is failing fast and having the, I suppose, organizational know-how to do that. Where does that go for this year? Sort of, I know we talked about that ecosystem a lot and sort of keeping that going. Is that sort of a case of we don't need to build everything in-house, so you can fail fast on that side? Or how does that play in with the internal building side of things and bringing an external tool in? And I might have just repeated what you said there, Georgina, so apologies if I'm asking the same question, just worded differently.
I think when we think about it, it's like, well, what is part of our core offering and what are we really, really good at, and what can we like ship elsewhere? Having said that, like this is what we went about, and I think we found like a number of issues with a third-party tool, and that's why I say like making sure you fail fast with it. And like it's difficult to know when to pull the plug, and how early to do that, I think, is a skill, and I think it's one that we're still learning, to be honest.
Gotcha. I suppose for closing remarks and looking, because obviously we can spend all evening, I imagine, talking about various different aspects of developing teams. But for this year coming, what are you all excited about in terms of feature and product development? Is there anything on the horizon that you're seeing that you can't wait to implement, or sort of can't wait to use in your teams?
Okay, I know we spoke about the distractions of AI. I'm really excited about using it for internal tooling and the productivity boost that it can bring, and really helping us scale the non-tech teams as well. Like, we focused a lot at the moment and in the past on how do we scale our tech. Now we can think about how do we scale the rest of our org effectively. And I do think like a lot of these tools are really going to help there.
Anyone else have anything they're excited for the next year?
I
guess Karen, no, go on.
Go on.
I think it's back to a few times I've said about value and value creation, value delivery. So it picks up on the previous points, but I'm thinking a lot about that last conversation we just had, the sort of build versus buy. It's like, if engineers are a finite resource, what do I spend them on? And then when do I go and buy solutions off the shelf? And then how do I stitch that together in a way that I'm not locking myself into a vendor that then might change a pricing model or changing something they do that then makes my product non-commercially viable. So yeah, and what am I excited about? I'm excited about getting my engineers all on value creation, not just dealing with, standard engineering build out things that we can go and solve other ways, either because of AI, we give them GitHub Copilot, whatever, and they go twice as fast, or because I buy a piece of SaaS off the shelf to go and solve their problems so that they can focus on the end user.
What I was going to say was similar to Georgina, also very excited about AI, despite all the comments we made earlier on in the call. But I think it's fair to say we are in a form of gold rush, and I think it presents new opportunities, some of which we might see now, some of which we don't see yet. And I think it would be a shame not to at least think about how that could potentially change the way we work internally, the way we use tools for our internal work streams, even outside of engineering, but also in our products. And I think so long as we make sure we align the engineering teams and the product teams to focus on the features that create value for customers, which is something I think everyone on this call has said again and again and again, I think there's lots of opportunity to do that. And yeah, lots of innovation in the last year that can drive it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've covered some really, really key points over the sort of how every team's been working over the last year, and obviously wider engineering teams as a whole. So I just wanted to take the time to thank all of you for joining me. As I said, we could be here all evening talking about these events and these sort of topics within sort of engineering teams. So yeah, obviously really appreciate everyone's input. I hope you all managed to take something away from each other and sort of learn from each other, but also give back to the community. Obviously, this is something that myself and Amicus do a lot with, sort of giving back and sort of sharing everyone's opinions. So yeah, thank you for joining me all.
Thank you very much, Sam.
No worries. Have a great day, and we'll speak all soon. So have a great day, but thank you for joining.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.